From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Car Night Show, starring Nolan, by enjoying Nolan's guest this week, Probyn Gregory, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
Those who know me know my love for the Beach Boys music. They know that that's all I play in the car ride. That they know that can get on others' nerves. That I've seen them a few times, and this is certainly another wonderful moment like this. I'm grateful and appreciative, as I said to him time and time again, for him to take the time out. He is the one and only, the very talented Probyn Gregory. Probyn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right.
That's all we can say right now during these wild times, which I want to ask you, now that you're back out touring. You just were in Switzerland with Bobby's group, which I want to talk about, which I'll mention at some point. But Brian's toured back going out. You just did Al's stuff as well. What's it like for you now at this point of this whole wild times we're in compared to the beginning?
You mean the pandemic or wild times, meaning being involved in sort of the Beach Boys peripheral world?
Well, I guess both, but more specifically the pandemic, seeing as that's sort of the
pandemic was very difficult for most musicians because, for starters, you couldn't, live music ceased, and even lessons were difficult because Zoom works up to a point, but if you're trying to play with people, and one in each city on their own device, there is a lag time, and it really gets in the way of being on the beat and that sort of thing. So people seem to find various workarounds. I wasn't teaching, so I didn't have to worry about it that much. But I know that, for instance, my brother Rohan, who's a violin teacher in New Hampshire, found that he has a lot of clients in Boston area. And he was welcomed very much the return to live in-person lessons, where you could really look at the person's hand and say, no, just move this like that. And
that's the frustrating thing that we I think now, I'm sure your brother appreciates more the little things like that you weren't able to do over Zoom or during this whole thing. And I'm glad that music and concerts are back, because I felt bad for people like yourself who weren't able to go out and do what they need to do in order to, pay the bills and keep the lights on, keep the water going, as Billy Hinshaw used to say on his live shows. But it's, and as we said beforehand, to be able to see Brian's show or to see Al's show and things, no, not necessarily, back to full speed, but it's a great thing. I talked to you, or just asked you about the thing in Switzerland with Bobby's group, with Chris Farmer and Gary and Randall Kirsch and the whole rest of the gang. What was that like? Because that's over in there, and I know Bobby had mentioned how excited he was. I didn't know that there was a fandom over there.
I'm not sure how much. It's hard to say where pockets of Beach Boys fans are. We happen to have a lot in Sweden. Of course, the UK is one of our biggest markets. We could probably sell out more halls there than even in the United States, regardless of the fact that the Beach Boys. But just to talk about CSI for a minute, that was great to have a veritable who's who of touring Beach Boys over the last 20 or more years, with those particular people: Bobby Fig, Chris Farmer, Gary Griffin, myself. Ed Carter elected not to come, and of course, Randall. Randall is my water brother. We ended up going into the lake there in Lake Lucerne, which is snow melt. I don't think we lasted 2 minutes in that water. It was ice cold.
Oh, I'm sure. Besides the love for Brian's music, which I know yourself and many others in the group have very deeply, we both grew up on the East Coast to some degree near the Atlantic Ocean. For you, though, what was the pull towards the Beach Boys music, seeing as they're sort of the West Coast life and all that fun jazz?
Sure. I mean, in my case, I have an edge. I can't say an edge. It's a difference that happened in my background, that I was what they call a faculty brat. My father was a college professor, and he just went wherever the work was. And it just so happened that he was teaching at Stanford for a couple of years in Palo Alto, California. And I happened to be there for the Summer of Love. And I also happened to be living in California when I got my first transistor radio, about this big. It was like a deck of cards, about that big. You'd hold it up to your ear because it had a tiny speaker. This is before there were earphones, and the year was 1965. I was 8 years old, and California Girls came on, and that song blew my mind. my tiny mind. So then, of course, the next year the big hit was Good Vibrations in 66. And after that, in 67, I remember Heroes and Villains being a big thing on the radio. At that point, we moved from California, but sort of the scene was set. I knew which of the bands, like Jefferson Airplane, the Byrds, the Beach Boys, these were California bands.
Yeah.
Even Arthur Lee and Love, who my parents used to play some of their records around the house. My parents were sort of forward looking. They were kind of beatnik hippies, if you will. Anyway, so I had this West Coast background, and then I moved to New Hampshire, where we've been spending every summer anyway. Ever since I was a kid, we'd been spending the whole summer in New Hampshire at the family place there. And we finally moved. My father got a job in the area, and so I carried this love of the Beach Boys with me to New Hampshire, and I didn't find too many other people where I could share that with. So I just kept it private. I could talk about Endless Summer.
Sure.
Everyone had that compilation, but anything beyond that, even if I just said, God only knows, people would say, I don't think I know that song.
Yeah. Well, I know Darian had a while ago, and I know that the story of you shared it with Matt and Greg Coffee of how you met Darian, and he had that custom Smile shirt on. But
right,
David Beard had done an interview, I think during the Zombies tour that Brian's group, you guys did with the Zombies, it might have been. And I think it was there where Darian, and I'm sure he said it in articles as well, where he got beat up for being a Beach Boys fan at the time that he found them, because at the time they weren't, super well loved as they were as years past and prior.
Right.
For the kids your age at that time when you first found them, and then, as the year sort of went on towards Good Vibrations, that stuff, what was the opinion of the Beach Boys for kids your age besides yourself?
I mean, literally, if I'm talking about 1965, I think I mentioned California Girls to some other people, but at that time in the mid 60s, I think it was the slightly older kids, like I was 8, and most of the kids that were like 12, 11, I'll say 11 and up, they were the ones that were sort of getting into music and watching, say, the Monkees because the TV show was on every week. You could see these guys doing songs, and they were, of course, older than us, but not that much older. And they weren't as far away as, say, the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles were great, but they were from another country. They were English, and we didn't see them. They didn't. Eventually, they had a cartoon, but like they weren't in our faces the way that the Monkees were, or that the Beach Boys seemed to be on the radio easily as much as the Beatles did. I Get Around, Don't Worry, Baby, any of these songs that were, even all summer long, whatever it was, that something would come on the radio, and you knew the sound of the Beach Boys because the vocals were top notch, better really than anyone else, in my opinion. Sure. And so anyway, but for kids my age, you didn't really talk about the Beach Boys. And, what was I in when I was 8? I was in 3rd grade, I think. I was one of the few kids I knew that had a transistor radio glued to my ear.
Now, being that you've played with both Brian and the Beach Boys and then other acts with the Beach Boys, a Beach Boys-esque type of situation, you obviously have a talent as a musician. You have a skill that most don't have. As I like to joke, I joked with Gary and Bobby, and I think Chris, I was a saxophone player for all of 6 seconds in middle school before I realized this wasn't for me. But for you to have the skill that you did, I'm sure at some point you knew that you were going to do this as a career to a certain extent. When did you realize that you had something different than other kids in terms of musical ability?
Not when I was a kid. I was just one of the people in the band. Although, because I'd been in Palo Alto where they had forward-looking, they were teaching Japanese in the elementary schools when I was there. I didn't happen to take the Japanese class, but it was available. And they handed out band instruments in 4th grade, which when I finally moved in 5th grade to New Hampshire, they were just starting out with these plastic flutophones, these little recorders, and so I already had a trumpet and I was playing it. So I had to just sort of play it in my own house. And I didn't think I was any better than the other kids. And in 6th grade, we were all given band instruments and, or I should say, given the choice to choose or not. But you know what? I didn't know that I was going to do a career in music. I did not know what I wanted to do. I knew I liked to read and I liked English. And I was even an English major in college, although I chose a college that had a really good conservatory, which while I was not in the conservatory, I took the preponderance of my classes. I took more music classes than I did in my own major, which was English, because Oberlin Conservatory where I went, I should say Oberlin College where I went, but the conservatory was, you could take classes there. So I took electronic music and theory and all of that sort of thing. I think it was when I graduated from college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So my old roommate had secretly taped me playing guitar along with Steely Dan records and Frank Zappa and things that were over my head that I couldn't really play, but I was doing my best to try to play them.
Yeah.
So anyway, he taped this and sent it to Berklee School of Music in Boston as an audition tape, and also to a place in Hollywood called the GIT, the Guitar Institute of Technology. And I was accepted at both places. And I got these letters, and luckily my old roommate had said, "You might be getting some funny mail." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So these acceptances came in the mail, and I was like, "I didn't apply to this school. Why am I accepted?" And he said, "Well, you told me you didn't know what you wanted to do. I'm sort of nudging you in the direction of music because I think, I'm your friend, and I think that you have something." And I was like, maybe, well, why not? And I got accepted. Sure, I'll go. And since Berklee was too close to New Hampshire, I didn't really want to be too close to my own home. I elected to go to California. And so I started there in 1980. And it was after that was a 1-year program. And it was after that, and I didn't think, again, there were plenty of working bands in town. And, the NAC had just been signed with My Sharona. So everyone thought, "Oh my God, I can get signed."
Yeah.
So, but I was just playing in bands, hoping to get signed, which actually didn't happen for 20 years. I played in 2 and 3 bands at a time, just original, playing for gas money around town. And eventually, by luck, I happened upon some people that were eventually very helpful to me. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. Yeah, so I didn't know when I was a kid, I did not, there was no music industry. There was no, sure, there were bands, the bands would tour, but not the way that bands tour now, where it's like, it's an accepted industry. There are trucks, there are lights, there are amps. Everyone knows how it goes. The crew goes ahead of time, sets up the gear, the band arrives, you do the sound check. It's a business.
Yeah.
But it didn't used to be a business. Some of the people in the Grateful Dead were the first ones to make a portable sound system that could go on a truck from city to city and set up wherever, in a field or using generators or in a venue. There wasn't this whole, as I say, a business. Anyway, I'm enough about that.
No. I found it interesting because when I had Gary on, he talked about, and he said that on Beach Boys Talk, how he knew when he was younger that he wanted to play for the Beach Boys, and that's what he did, and he gets that. And then you share your story, and it's you have no idea that you want to be a musician, and then you take that class at Oberlin College, and that music related class, and then you go to the GIT. Did you realize that when you took that music class, whether it was that specific electronic one, that you're sort of calling that this could be what I do when I get older, or was it still just not till GIT where you realized that this is what I'm doing?
No, it was not until really after GIT when that I began seeing that there were some people that were, they would do wedding bands, or what you would call on the East Coast GB, general business, things where you play essentially for money, which is fine. I mean, I didn't have to be playing original music. I did choose that route of playing in bands, trying to get signed. And I always had other jobs on the side that would pay the rent, which is I was made sure to, because I didn't have any illusions. I saw people by me right and left falling by the wayside that had moved out sold everything, come from wherever, Michigan. And then a year later, they're returning to Michigan and getting a bank job because they couldn't get a paying music gig in Los Angeles, which admittedly, Los Angeles is a tough town. A lot of at that. Now, I think a lot of the orchestral people go a little further afield. They go to Czechoslovakia or places like that. But it used to be that LA was one of the top centers of, film scoring, play on TVs, movies. You have some really great players that have been playing for many, many years in LA. And so that was tough trying to break into that. Like when I became a member of the union, I remember looking at the little union paper and seeing at such and such a session for Star Wars. And you see the same names over and over that you saw at the other A-list movies. And every once in a while, you'd see someone that you knew that was a peer of yours that had broken into the system, that had a contractor use them, and they were, had now made it into this upper echelon. And I never did that. I never made it into that, but nor did I really want to either. I think I was much more interested in the live music scene and the original music scene. And because I was making enough money at my little editors or part-time jobs to pay the rent, it didn't bother me too much. I wasn't reliant upon music to pay all my bills, which maybe I should have done that earlier. And I might have met the people that I eventually met. I might have met them earlier. I don't know.
I find it interesting because, going to school and then going to a school specifically geared towards music, and, Charlie Watts, rest in peace to Charlie. He had mentioned how he never had any musical training in an interview he had done a while ago, and how he wished he did that to learn, the fundamentals and stuff. Do you think that with your experience going to the musical school that it sort of, I don't want to say propelled you farther, but sort of helped you advance a little further compared to other people starting out without that musical school experience?
That's a tough issue because there are plenty of people that I run across in my various endeavors in music who do not read music. They can't talk theory, but they know the music in their head. If they hear something, they can play it right back at you. And generally, these people are good with people. They're friendly. Sure. They know how to fit in to a team, which is one of the most important things to me about being in bands and being in music, is knowing how to work with others and knowing when not to burn a bridge. For instance, I always tell young and upcoming musicians, whoever you're playing with, even if they seem like they suck right now, they may be better later, or they may be in a position to help you later. So don't burn a bridge. Don't talk behind people's back. Don't assume that you know more than another person. You just know differently than another person.
True.
And again, down the line, if you're nice to everyone, the niceness comes back to you. It's like the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. I have found over and over that sort of attitude and that sort of behavior as a person, especially on teams, on whatever the team is doing, be it music or something else, that stuff really is helpful and is of value down the line.
Now, I can see that perfectly well, and you're a vital piece to Brian's group, and I'm sure that they all have their love and appreciation for you. Now, in my situation, although where I'm from in the United States and they rave about it in California Girls, but most people my age aren't Beach Boy fans or diehard fans, let alone music fans before 95. Even though, they listen to the hits, they're not listening to, maybe I don't know, from the 85 album or Baby Blue or Love Surrounds Me.
Right.
And
right.
In your situation, though, being that you are a fan of Smile and you, I'm sure, listen to all the unreleased material, describe to me, and I know you shared before, describe to me that emotion that you felt when you saw Darian that famed night wearing that custom Smile shirt.
Yes, it's true. I had been collecting as many fragments, usually on cassettes, that I either bought off of people or traded or were gifted or whatever. And that stuff from the Smile stuff was so different and so unusual. And it was like it came from another planet. It really, really just boggled me. It opened my eyes. And so I'm at the Club 88 in Los Angeles, a place that's closed now. Not Club 88, Club Lingerie, in Hollywood. One of the places that I played the most in my life. Still, even now, in my 60s, I probably have played more at Wong's West and Club Lingerie in Los Angeles clubs. Anyway, there's Darian wearing a Smile shirt. And of course, I knew the artwork. I went up to him. I said, "Excuse me, but where'd you get that shirt?" And he said, "I made it myself. I silk screened it." And so we started talking. And at the end of the evening, he offered to make me a shirt, which I still have, that original Smile shirt. And we became friends. And eventually we started making music together. But one of the first things that we did is we got together with this guy, Dominic Priori, who you may know because he wrote the first big book on Smile called Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile, which I think was one of the working titles of the album. He also called it Dumb Angel Gazette, which was the other working title for Smile. And I edited that book, the first one that came out in, I forget, 84, 5, something like that. So Dominic and Darian and I got together at his place. I don't think Nick Walusko was there. Maybe Nick was there. Of course, he's not around to ask, extremely sadly. But we ordered out for pizza, and we were there for hours and hours playing everything and saying and listening to some of the stuff that was likely from the comedy album. I don't know if you're familiar with that, the comedy album that he was working at with Hal Blaine. It was like a duo between Brian and Hal Blaine about a vegetable, like a farm stand. And the George fell into his French horn is almost surely from those sessions, and not really a Smile track, as some people have said. Because I mean, if you listen to it, it's really sort of out of character. It's really, they're talking through their French horns, and it's a comedy bit, and Smile is not really a comedy album. Maybe Brian, maybe I'm wrong, and Brian always had a place on that. But I think this is one of the outtakes, and there's other things that you can hear. You can hear Hal sometimes doing the bit where Brian says, "Get that vegetable stand out of here," and Hal Blaine with his voice says, "What? I'm not doing." It's if you don't know them, I can find the bits and send them to you. But anyway, all this about Smile. You're asking about. Well, that was a big deal to me to meet someone that cared about Smile as much as I did. I mean, there was a paper that doesn't exist anymore called the Los Angeles Reader. And at one point, I took out an ad in the paper. It was it wasn't a quarter page or anything. It was just like a, inch ad. True. Must have cost me all of $15. And I said, "Dear Capitol Records, please release Smile. This is important stuff. Everyone needs to hear this." So I think I've answered your question.
You answered it because, and I'm also curious, and maybe you sort of you'll double dip in this answer. But from that, when you saw him, and maybe it was when you saw the shirt first, or you went talked to him first after seeing it, did you think that after seeing him that your life in terms of music would change?
I had no inkling of what was going to happen with the Wondermints and the Brian Wilson Band and the arc of our time together. No, I didn't. I just thought, here's another super fan. That's what I thought.
I'm curious, and this may be, too far in advance or a little not connected to the same point, but in your opinion, do you think is the most underrated album in the Beach Boys catalog, if you could name one?
Well, the people that don't really know the Beach Boys, that's a hard one. Sunflower is the first thing that springs to mind, but I also think that some people don't give Today It's Just Desserts. I mean, to me, sure, you can talk Summer Days, Summer Nights, but to me, Today was the bridge to Pet Sounds. And I mean, back in my mind, you can hear that song alone is practically the ramp into Pet Sounds.
The year is 99. You've been with the Wondermints for a few years before joining Brian's band. Playing with the Wondermints those early years before joining Brian's band, what was that like?
Great. I really liked the Wondermints. I sort of weaseled my way into that band. I came to see a lot of their shows, and then I offered to guest on trumpet, which I did. And eventually I began playing guitar with them. And I was never a really full member. I was never a writing member the way that Mikey and Nick and Darian were. But, and we always seemed to have a sort of after Brian Cassan left, we had a sort of a floating bass chair, which I briefly was in. But we've used a bunch of different people over the years, although we seem to have settled on David Nolte. Although I have to tell you the sad news, which you may not already know, which is that now that Nick has passed, there will be no more Wondermints shows. That's the end of the band. I mean, without Nick, they're Darian, I'm sure, would agree. It's not going to happen. But that was, I really loved that band because we would sometimes do cover versions of songs, and we would try to be as faithful as we possibly could to them, which held us in good stead when it finally came around to we were playing at a charity show for Brian Wilson, and Brian came to his own charity show and in fact played at his own charity show. And he saw us we did Surf's Up, in which I sang the lead, and I saw him in the audience, and I was, I was out. I was so freaking nervous. And I was like, a diamond necklace playing the my voice was shaking. And we did our prayer. And I think we did This Whole World.
Wow.
If memory serves. So he saw us play, and I guess he was impressed and remembered us. And about a year later, we were invited to accompany him on a radio show that he needed to do, that he needed a band for. So we did that, and eventually we got that call in spring of '99 to come out to St. Charles, Illinois, where Brian was living at the time, to audition for the band. And Jeff Foskett was already there, and I didn't know Jeff at all, but he was in the hotel room next to us. And anyway, but what was it like to be in the Wondermints? The Wondermints were a spirited, original, joyous band that I was very proud to be able to help out as much as I did during the time that we were together. And the records that I managed to do with them, I thought were really good. I'm sorry they didn't make a bigger splash in the sort of the larger, pop world. Like we were never trying to be Jellyfish, but I think that was something that was in people's minds. Just like, if Jellyfish can make it doing pop, maybe our kind of pop could possibly get to be a national hit.
I'm curious though, also, seeing as you're still with Darian, you did the Wondermints, and then you're now with, obviously you've been playing with him in the Brian Wilson band. What's that like to see that? Because, he's a guy who is well knowledgeable in the Beach Boys stuff. I remember Mike, I think, called him, it was Paul who called him the secretary of the band for his knowledge of it. And I'm sure he plays a big role in the group. So to see him and how he operates and see how he helps continue to preserve this music, I'm sure it's definitely inspiring.
Yes. One of the things about the Wondermints was that we never wanted to, like, even if we did what we considered to be a pretty good show, we never wanted to rest on our laurels. We were always trying to improve and trying to not be satisfied with what was just naturally happening, but trying to make it the best that it could possibly be. And that particular attitude served us in very good stead with Brian, because, there were other bands or other people that had played with Brian, and I'm not slagging them or anything, and nor am I slagging the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys, I think, have gone through some different iterations with their live personnel. And I think that the current lineup, they've really also stepped up their game and tried to make things as good as possible. Now, when I say this, I'm saying this in the context of, there was a time, like when I first moved to California, the friends that I met, that, like, one of my friends, Tim Horrigan, loaned me a copy of Surf's Up, because I'd never heard of it, that album. He said, "You got to hear this record." And here I was listening to Till I Die and Surf's Up. And it's like, oh, okay, I get it. But people were telling me, don't go to see the live Beach Boys. They're rough around the edges. It's sort of sloppy. They're a little lazy. You'll do better just listening to the records and, just stay with that. And so as a result, and all through the 80s and most of the 90s, I never saw the Beach Boys live. And I can't swear that, that they were sloppy or lazy, but I was hearing this from some of my fellow fans, which was stupid.
Yeah.
I regret that I ever listened to those people in the first place. I feel bad. I never got to see Dennis play. I never got to see Carl play. Yeah. By the time that I finally got out, he had just died by the time I first saw the Beach Boys. Anyway, so he, probably of the people that I know, he, Nick, and I cared about the music. It just affected us deeply, more than most people that we knew. And so we were really into making the legacy of Brian be something that he could be proud of, that it wouldn't be just falling back on some generic version or a different version. Like, we were the ones that really wanted to do Caroline No in its original form. And there were some other parties who I won't name that wanted to do some other kind of groove that sounded more modern and maybe more radio friendly. Yeah. We objected to that and almost put our job in jeopardy doing so. Yeah. But that's a whole other story that I probably under a non-disclosure agreement, I'm probably under contract not to tell those stories. Yeah. Suffice it to say that, that it really helps to if we, and all of us in the band now, I think in the Brian band, we've all, sort of come around, and even if they call some tune that doesn't sound like it's much, like Drive In, Brian used to love that song. We did it for a couple of years. We haven't done it for a while, or Monster Mash.
Yeah.
Brian likes to do Monster Mash. One time we even did it twice. We did it I think it was in Barcelona at a festival. We opened with Monster Mash. And at the end of this set, Brian said, "Hey, let's do Monster Mash again." So we did.
Well, I know there's a video out there, and I think it's on Brian's YouTube channel where you guys are doing rehearsals and you're doing Monster Mash. That might have been 2008 or whenever that was. And that's another thing you talk about, everyone in the group really helping preserve and appreciate and showing love and respect and all that jazz to Brian, his music. And I see that at the concerts, and I believe it was the one I went to by myself, and Brian had said, and the best singer in the world, Darian. And I'm sure Brian has complimented him before, and he complimented Matt Jardine, who him in itself is an amazing musician, and they've heard that before, but I think that really shows the trust that Brian has in the guys who he plays with, especially when you see that they've been there since the beginning. And I'm just, I love when Darian does I Can Hear Music and Darlin' 2 Carl songs, which, I Can Hear Music, a very hard song to sing. And for Darian to do it is a marvelous thing. And he's I'm sure he's a very great person. Lord, I want to talk about the work that you've done with Brian and his solo stuff, excluding the recent piano album. You've been on all of his solo stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong, since Getting In Over My Head.
Yeah, let's see. Was there anything before that? 99. There was not really. There was Live at the Roxy, but that wasn't anything. But there were a couple of songs. Wasn't there a new song on the Live at the Roxy record? Is it Love or something like that? I'm trying to remember. It's so long ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, there one or two tracks would appear, but I think maybe Getting On Over My Head was the first real album of new, or when you say new, I think there was some Paley Bryan stuff that had been there.
Yeah.
Like Saturday Morning in the City was an older one, but it's been wonderful to be part of this. I'll give you an anecdote from that album. I think a lot of people that work with Brian at some point in their dealings with him, they have an inkling that maybe they have an idea for the song that might be better than what Brian has in his mind, but you don't know what Brian has in his mind because you haven't heard it all yet. So this happened to me. I forget what song it was, but he said, "Go get your melodica," which is like a little one rank of accordion with like a little breathing tube. Sounds like a harmonica a little bit. Anyway, so I got it out, and he said, "Play such and such," and he sang a certain line, and I thought to myself, "Ooh, that doesn't really fit there. That's kind of, I don't know, I won't call it ugly, but it's not really what I would have thought of Brian would come up with." But I did as he wanted.
Of course, yeah.
And then as I recorded, I thought to myself, I think this other line that just came to me might be better. So I said, "Hey, Brian, I just did this line. But what about this? What if I did this there?" And then I played my idea. And he said, "That's okay, but let's stick with my idea." I said, "Fine." So I put it down later. I forgot about it. And then later on, when I heard the whole song with everything that was in there, my idea wouldn't have worked at all with the harmonies, the vocal harmonies and the other instruments that he had in his head. So I think this happened to Carol Kay too. She was asked to play something and said, "I don't know if that's going to work." He said, "It'll work. It'll work." And then later on, of course, it fit perfectly. And whatever she had in mind would not have worked because she didn't know what things Brian was in the future going to put on over your part.
Well, Gary had mentioned something of that back when he lived in California in his home studio, and Brian came over. I don't know which album Gary said it was, but he said, "I'm going to come over, I'm going to sing vocals, and we're going to do guitar, and we're going to do keyboards. It's going to take 45 minutes. And lo and behold, it all worked out and all worked. And it's an amazing experience, I'm sure, for you, especially to be from Getting In Over My Head. And if you had done stuff prior with Brian, to then the songs, the handful of songs that were for the documentary, and then No Peer Pressure. And that, speaking of both of those two, do you have a favorite song from the documentary if you've seen it fully, and then the album No Peer Pressure, which wasn't, a separate thing?
Oh boy, what was my favorite song on No Peer Pressure? Might have been the what was that? God, I'm spacing the titles now. The Sailing Away. What was that?
Yeah, that was one because I know
Was that the name, Sailing Away? I'm having a brain freeze.
Because I know Brian did the concert with friends, and he had some of those people out there, and Blondie was there. But I think Sail Away or Sailing Away, something of that nature.
Wow, I'm spacing on it, but that one, yeah, I sound like a big fan. I am. I don't even know the names of the songs.
No, you've
on that one, and then when you by the documentary, you're not talking about, of course, Love and Mercy. You mean Long Promised Road?
The new one,
most recent one. Yeah. I don't know how to favorite on there. I mean, we redid Feel Flows. That I liked. I mean, I sort of like it was an older tune, I think, from maybe even the Paley days. Rock and roll, rock and roll, rock and roll. Very basic. As when Brian first came up with the idea about 5 or 6 years ago, doing a rock and roll album, which I think he still hasn't written all the songs for that, but some of them are these. Yeah. I didn't realize he did tell us it was going to be 50s, like Chuck Berry.
Okay.
Da 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 da. So we knew that was the sort of the vibe of it coming up. His musical mind is not like yours and mine. He thinks in his own original way, and there's not any way to second guess him or know what is going to come out of him. Like sometimes he'll be, in the old days when he would play piano in the dressing room, which he doesn't really do much now anymore. I mean, I'm not sure what's really behind that, but he used to get a lot more joy out of playing the keyboard. Like before the show, he would be in his room playing the piano, which is we'd always, we wouldn't want to be hanging in the doorway looking in, but he came up with some good stuff. He there, just like even ideas would come to him in the dressing room. There was a song that I don't think ever has been released called Path of Life that we did little snippets of at live shows about maybe 10 years ago or less. And hopefully that will all see the light of day. Anyway, Brian has such an original mind. And I mean, fans sometimes send me demos or songs that I've never heard of from the 60s. I mean, I consider myself I'm not a completist. I don't have a giant collection.
Sure.
But I know a bunch of his songs, and at least twice a year, I hear some new thing from Brian that I've never heard. I've never heard that just was from a little thing that he threw down in 1971 or 77 from an outtake from Love You or something.
Yeah.
Who knew? I didn't know. He's an almost endless fount of creativity, which is it's slowed down a little bit in modern times, but he still got it.
Yeah. Well, it's unbelievable. And I think, and you have other bands, out there and artists who have, when they put out albums, not everything makes the cut, and there's stuff that may never see the light of day, but there's just so much that they've put together with Brian solo wise or with the Beach Boys that you'll never hear. And when you hear it, it's, unbelievable. I know on the Feel Flows box set, was it I Need a Friend? That was just the keyboards or piano. And there's a Dennis vocal on it that, I've listened to on YouTube, and it's so, powerful. And that speaks the Beach Boys world and the aura that they create. And like Brian, just so the creative ability that he has to have everything in his head and knows that that's what it's going to be like is unbelievable. I still marvel at my dad when I told him that he wrote Surfer Girl at 19 and had this song in his car driving home. It's like, how the hell do you? I can't do that. I mean, I'm not musically talented at all. I'm a hack of a shower singer, but it's just it's unbelievable. But God bless him, and hopefully that rock and roll album comes out. I'd love to hear it, and we'll see. Now in 2012, a big event happened. It was a big year for the Beach Boys, or 2013 for the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson, and I'm sure the rest of the people who partook in that tour. And it was the 50th anniversary. Now, seeing as you liked the Beach Boys growing up, you played on that tour, did you ever think in the slightest way that you'd ever had the opportunity to play with the Beach Boys like you did?
No. Yeah, I never thought that there would be a reunion, because there always seemed to be some sort of a disagreement between the principal people.
Sure.
And didn't seem like there was any way to solve that. But I think it was Joe Thomas, Brian's producer, who originally floated the idea and even made I don't know if he threw some money at the problem or whatever, but he got people to talk to one another. And he's a good businessman, and he set up the tour, and I believe he made his money back.
Yeah.
So, and Brian's proviso, I'll call it, for participating was that he wanted as many of us in his own band to be there as possible. And of course, Mike wanted some of his people.
Yeah.
Some of them ended up on stage, like Scott Totten and other people, and John Cowsill, and other people ended up helping being stage manager or tour manager, like Timmy Bonhomme, who's the keyboard player in the Beach Boys, ended up on the tour. And some other people from Mike's organization came and were part of the business end. That was an amazing tour. We started out doing a regular set, but I think, I can't remember if this is among your questions, but the first day I came to the rehearsal, and there's Al, and there's Mike, and there's Bruce, who, I mean, he may not be an original member. Sure. Come on, 65. Yeah. He's earned his stripes. So, and hearing that sound, the sound of the, of course, there's no Dennis and Carl, but David Marks was there, and but all their voices, like our hair just raised up on the back of my neck. I'm like, oh my God, that sound! Like no matter how well we think we sing, and we don't think we sing well in the Brian Band, as I say, we're always trying to improve ourselves where we can. But we will, no matter how we sing, we will never sound like that, like those people, those Beach Boys. That harmony of Mike and Al and Brian and Bruce, it was just heavenly. It blew my mind. I was so happy to be part of that tour. By the end of the tour, we were doing essentially 2 shows. I think we did, was it 64 songs in our final show? It was like a 2.5-hour show. We could barely talk afterward. We had sung so much.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about that tour, because I'm sure that's an unbelievable thing to say to yourself. Damn, how the heck was I part of this? And I want to ask you, well, maybe in this sort of way, I guess I can ask you, but there's a song that they sang on the Carnal Passions album, All This Is That, and they performed that there. And then they had the children come on to play on that album. And I know Brian had performed Carl's portion of it with Carl's son, Jonah. I believe, no, or was it Justin?
I can't remember. I think it was Justin.
Because one of them is on the Add Some Music to Your Day new thing that David Beer had done. I think it was Justin. But for you to experience that song where it's got a lot of layers and it's got a lot of harmony on it, and it could be for any song, is that a moment where you're just like taking back and you just have to look it in while you're still playing on there? Sure.
I remember that on that tour, there was, because we were juggling both the Wondermints, the Brian Wilson drummer, Mike D'Amico, and John Cowsill would take turns on drums. And when Cowsill was on drums, then Mike would be on bass.
Okay.
Because Mike D'Amico happens to be an excellent multi-instrumentalist even on guitars, which you would never know, but it's true. Anyway, when Mike was on drums, then I was on bass. And I remember I played bass on All This Is That. And the layering and the parts of that, we were very fortunate to have a band big enough that we could cover all the vocal parts. And in most cases, we could double most of the vocal parts. Some song like Heroes and Villains actually has 5 or 6 discrete vocal parts. Wow. So that's a little difficult to double everything with that. And some of the Smile stuff was the same. There were so many things going on in, say, Cabanescence, that we just had to let single people do one line because there wasn't enough manpower to do it.
Sure.
But anyway, but a song like All This Is That with all the layers, it sounded beautiful. And of course, it's a great song, and I love Carl's vocal on the original. And even though we didn't have that on the reunion tour was a lot of fun, and I was very honored to be part of that band. Especially when, I think I have said this in maybe other interviews, when I was 10 years old, my favorite bands in the world, in this order, because of the TV show, the Monkees were number 1.
The
Beatles were number 2, the Beach Boys were number 3, and the Byrds were number 4.
Yeah.
Now, it just so happened that latterly in 2012, I was asked to tour with the Monkees, although they then added Christian Nesmith, Mike's son, and Coco Dolan's, Mickey's sister. So the budget for me was gone. So it didn't end up happening, but I was asked. In 2012 to tour with the Monkees. So if I could have played with 2 of my favorite bands in the world in 1 year, my head would have exploded.
Yeah.
And later on, I did get to tour with the Monkees in 2019, and I was very fortunate enough to play at their final show at the Greek Theater just this last year. And then, unfortunately, Mike Nesmith passed away, and Mickey is left on to soldier on and he will. He's a trooper. Mickey Dolenz is.
Well, and then give him a lot of credit, similar to, the current itineration of the Beach Boys, Mike and Bruce, to carry on the legacy of the Beach Boys. And I know Mickey was just on the Beach Boys cruise that Mike and Bruce and that group did recently.
That's right.
For a few days. I want to ask you about the tour, a specific question. I know it was, you're singing a few songs from each album over this 50 years at that point. Was there a song that you hoped maybe, and that may be a difficult question because there's so many songs, but was there a song you wished that you got to play on that tour that you guys didn't end up playing?
It's funny. At this point, I can't remember if we did it or not. I think we did not do a song that we tried with Brian, and we were always dissatisfied with the sound of the vocals. Also, because they're long held notes. I'm referring to Warmth of the Sun.
Okay.
Warmth of the Sun is one of those tunes where if you don't nail it, it's lacking. And we weren't nailing it in the same way that with the Brian Band, we used to do Melt Away. And then eventually, not too far into its life, we retired it because it wasn't sounding up to snuff and it needed to be great. And it wasn't great. It's funny, that there's one song that hardly any band, be it Beach Boy tribute band or the Beach Boys, I don't know about if Mike and Bruce have done this song, but "Girls on the Beach" is a song that I really like, and no one ever seems to do. I don't know why they don't do it.
You mentioned "Girls on the Beach" for the 50th anniversary you want to play. Is there a song, and I asked Gary this, I think, that you don't play with Brian's group, or maybe haven't in a while, that you wish you guys would play again or play for the first time? With
Brian's group, because we've done a lot. The amazing thing about Brian is that I've been in the band 23 years, and I'm not even sure that we've played every hit. There's some songs that were, somewhat, maybe they only got into the top 100. But trying to think of what song haven't we done that I would love to do. For a long time, it was Cool Water. Okay. But we've done, I don't know, we've done a lot of different things with Brian. Let me think about that for a minute. I didn't see that on the list that you had sent me of the questions prior. I'd be ready with an answer. Just cast my mind about. Well, I know a song that I think maybe Al sang it in the original. I think it's off the '85 album. The Stevie Wonder track.
Oh,
I do love you.
Yes, I love that.
Now the thing is, here's the thing. That is a Stevie Wonder song. Yes. I'm pretty sure he's playing drums on it. The melody and the chord changes are absolutely Stevie. Yeah. So it's not that Beach Boys-iest song. Sure. But because of that, I would like to hear the Beach Boys do it live. But it has a sort of it doesn't go that high. I do love you. Yeah. I do love you. Was that Al? I think it was Al.
It was Al and Carl. I think Carl sang, the main part of it, but Al was on there. But no, Steve Levine, who was the engineer for that album, he produced also. Yeah, he had mentioned in an interview how Stevie was writing or putting together that song, and the Beach Boys needed stuff, or I think they were recording, and then they played it, and they were there. But I know he's playing the drum beat or whatever the correct name for that instrument is. But that, and maybe I don't know, is another song that's complete rock and roll song that I won't see the Beach Boys or Brian ever play it. No, cross my fingers. Mm-hmm. But in that song, I don't know if you've listened to it recently, but there's a guitar riff in there that is a total Blondie Chaplin type of thing. And when I saw it, speaking of Blondie, this time when I took them to see you guys when you did that fall tour, my dad was in a whole nother world. And when I told him that Blondie had played with the Rolling Stones, he said, "Oh, that makes sense, because Blondie's a completely different cat than Brian or any of the other main members." I want to end these last handful of questions before the final segment of the Al stuff, the Al solo tour and the CSI stuff that you just did. you've toured with some other, Beach Boy players or members in Al's group or with CSI. What's that like to not only do Al solo stuff, but then the stuff with California Surfing with Bobby?
Well, I was with the Al thing, he has different formats that he tours on. The most common one when he goes out is the trio of Al, Matt, and in this case, it's Debbie Scher is the keyboard player who has subbed in with the Brian Band before. He's a great keyboard player, and it used to be a guy named Jeff Allen Ross who was a famous guy for hire who had been in a touring version of Badfinger and is the musical director for Peter Asher and I think Denny Lane now. Anyway, so it's sort of sometimes there's a different person as the third person. And then there's the larger band, the Friends and Family, which doesn't play very often. I think their last tour was about 10 years ago. And that is with Carney and Wendy, of course. And it should have been Rob Bonfilio, Carney's husband, on guitar, but he had other obligations at the time. So he asked if I wouldn't mind subbing for him, which I did sub for him on this last tour, which was great. And unfortunately, through various bad luck, we had more shows booked than we actually ended up playing, which is too bad because it was a really fun show. Yeah. And the last night, I think, was it the last night in New York City? Someone in the audience just called out, California Saga. Now, we'd never so much as rehearsed it. We played it. I knew it. Matt knew it. Al knew it. And Bobby fell in because he knew it from the old days on drums. Yeah. And we just, we plowed through and did it as well as we could. I actually thought it sounded pretty good.
Well, I like that because I went to see it in Connecticut. I'm trying to think of where it was in Connecticut. It was the Wall Street Theater in Connecticut. I'm trying to think of where that is.
Oh, you were at that show. Okay.
Yeah. And that was that show. And I have a funny story from that, but I like that because it was different from Brian's group because I feel like it's so, and correct me if I'm wrong again, but it's a more, I don't want to say subdued or quiet environment, but it's a little bit more mellow and it's not as rock and rolling as when Blondie comes on and it's going crazy and he's
right. And this is a reflection of Al's personality because Al is a more sort of gentle, friendly guy. And not that Brian isn't either, but somehow when the sets are put together, like they try to do dance numbers to, get the audience going or something. And Al's less into that. And there's not really a place for, guitar histrionics, shall I say.
But on that tour, you also played with Ed Carter, who besides Mike Kowalski, if those people know their Beach Boys history, Ed Carter was one of the first touring members of the Beach Boys in the late 60s.
That's right. He goes back to 68.
Yes, he was there for 30 years, almost. What's that like for you to play with someone like Ed Carter in that group?
So California Surf Incorporated is made up of ex-touring Beach Boys. Randall Kirsch, as it turns out, and some of the shows were attended by Gary Griffin and Chris Farmer. Myself, Ed Carter is a really wonderful guy. I mean, he's so sort of quiet and rock solid. He played bass with the Beach Boys, but he's really a guitar player. I don't know if you know, but that he jammed with Jimi Hendrix.
Really?
Yes. And he knows a lot of people, Ed does. And he generally teaches these days. He's living up in Portland, Oregon. But when you start doing like salsa stuff, he's all over that.
Wow.
He knows all that. He's a really fine guitar player and a swell human being. That's a lot of people call. I think even Al calls him Smiling Ed Carter.
Because he's always smiling. I have the Nebworth concert, the famous concert on DVD, and he's smiling on there. And which that in itself is a great concert. Although you play a menagerie of instruments, I know Paul always likes to say, and next we have Probyn Gregory. He played the trombone just for this concert, and
which is not really true.
Yeah, but it makes it feel like it's great. It means a whole heck of a lot. But for you, what's that like though when you're playing all those instruments? Because I'm sure it's very hard, and I know Paul plays a lot, and I know Richie Kanata when he was there, he played two different types of instruments. But for you, when you're playing all these instruments, what's that like during the Brian Wilson shows?
Well, I'm just part of the team. I'm trying to fit in and make the best sound that we can possibly make. And if that means I'm on banjo, that's fine. If I'm on theremin, or tannerin, as we have that we're playing the copy of the original instrument, then that's fine. Also, to be blunt, if that means that I don't get to sing on a certain thing because it sounds better that way, I'm fine with that. Yeah. When I was first in the band, it bugged me if I didn't get to sing, and I thought there was maybe something that my voice would fit in best. But I've learned to put my ego aside and just say, it's about the music. It's not about me.
Sure.
People didn't come to see me. They came to see, the Beach Boys or Brian Wilson or whoever they want. And when they get a really good sonic experience, if that means that I wasn't playing or I was only playing tambourine, then I'm happy with that. If that's what it takes.
For you, you've played, whether it's with Brian or your experiences with the Beach Boys for that 50th anniversary tour, whatever else has been. And I'm sure I know the answer is similar to what I'm going to say, but it's been worth it, I'm sure, or more than what you've ever thought.
More than worth it. As I say, I am honored to be part of this band. If I wasn't in the band, I would be in the front row because I'm such a fan. And everyone does it right. They do what they're asked or do what they're called upon to do with joy in their heart and with the best that they can bring. And I'm so blessed to be part of a team in which that is so. So yeah, I just feel like I just got so lucky because, for 20 years I tried to get signed in bands and tried to make any money at music, and I wasn't. And it would bother me to see. I would go and see bands. They'd get pick of the week in the LA Weekly. I'd see some club band and they'd be appearing in diapers. That was their gimmick, but there were never any songs or any vibe. Rarely was there something that sort of stood out to me. And it wasn't me being sour grapes. I wanted to like these bands.
Yeah.
There was nothing there. And so finally I started writing to the papers like, I'm sorry, but this is not pick of the week. You can't, I think these are your friends.
Yeah.
This is all like a nepotism. And
Yes. Now, hopefully I don't get in trouble for using the song title for this segment I'll do before I take your time. And, like I've said before, the time you've taken out of your day to do this, it means a lot. But this segment I like to call All This Is That off the Beach Boys name. In this segment, I threw a few hypothetical things out there and you choose either this or that. So are you ready, Probyn?
I'm ready.
So, coming up is the 60th anniversary. So for you, would you rather see a holographic Dennis and Carl with the living members of the Beach Boys or what they did for the 50th tour?
You mean I probably wouldn't want a hologram, but I wouldn't mind them showing films. Like in the 50th tour, when we did Forever, Dennis actually sang the vocal and we went along with the vocal. There was a click track, I believe, was created around that because it drifted a little bit. And if I remember right, it was God Only Knows for Carl, although maybe it was a different song. But I liked that. Holograms. Anyway,
what they do for Roy Orbison, you wouldn't want to see that, or Elvis?
I mean, there's the ABBA is about to do that, aren't they? ABBA is about to do a big hologram show. If it's at a special theater and it's an all hologram show, that's fine.
Okay.
But as part of a 60th reunion show, my personal feeling is that I would rather do it a little bit more old school and show the films. It has, to me, there's too much razzle dazzle and modernity about the hologram, and there's a little more emotional impact with the. That's just that again. You're asking that, so there's my answer.
No, I agree with that, and it definitely was powerful. When I've seen YouTube clips of that, and when they did that I believe it was when you guys went overseas to Japan and they recorded something live, or maybe it was the live album from that was over there, but that was very powerful. Now, seeing that, also speaking of that and how they released 50th anniversary of some of the hits from over the last 50 years, the 60th anniversary, and hopefully they release something similar to that. Would you rather see some new material like That's Why God Made the Radio, or something where they have a good chunk of unheard stuff from each period with their classics as well?
That's a tough one because, for instance, I never hear that song anymore. That's Why God Made the Radio. And I loved that track. That was my favorite track on the record. I guess I'd sort of like to hear the modern stuff, even though my heart and my initial hook into the Beach Boys was on the early stuff. But I mean, at this point, there aren't that many outtakes of things from pre-67
True.
that I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, after that time, it gets a little fuzzy, and there could be things from all sorts of different studios, brother and otherwise, that have maybe even not now seen the light of day. Although there are people who have sought, who've gone into the vaults, Alan Boyd and Mark Lynette, and tried to unearth what they could.
There's another song from That's Why God Made the Radio, Pacific Coast Highway, I believe is what the name of it is on that album. They all harmonize at the beginning of it, and it's a powerful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know they did it at the Grammy tour where they did, a few songs, and that kind of was the precursor to the 50th anniversary. Would you like to see a decent sized tour, or a stop here and there and exhibit type of thing at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame where they commemorate them and what they've done?
Oh, maybe I'm not familiar with this. You're saying the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does something where they go to different cities with
I'm just saying, like, if they did something like that where they did a few stops here and there, and then they had something like that, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where they have this presentation or documentary, whatever it may be, instead of a big world tour.
Oh, I think that I would like, if it was me as a fan, I would rather have things like stopping at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or even doing like an occasional Q&A where you just have them out on stage instead of that night doing a show. Just have like an evening with the Beach Boys where they take, questions from the audience. Of course, they'd have to be pre-screened because there'd be some doofus that would say something either politically not right, that would make someone angry in the organization. We don't want that. But as long as it was pre-screened, that's what I would prefer. I mean, nothing against it. I will say from a performing perspective, it does get tough doing the things that Mike and Bruce do. Mike and Bruce go out a lot.
Yes. Brian
Wilson goes out some. Like I think the longest tour I ever did was that Beach Boys tour. We were out for 6 months.
Yeah.
I just had a child. I mean, my wife was going to kill me. I was only home a couple of days a month. And if that had been offered to do the next year, I would have had to decline. As much as I would have liked to have done it, there's just too many shows.
True.
So Mike and Bruce, they keep up a real a full calendar, and so sometimes it gets difficult from the backing musician's perspective because we have families and obligations, or things, life events happen.
Yeah.
People pass away. You want to be at your father's funeral and not on tour with the Beach Boys, but so. With that in mind, I think I would rather have it broken up with smaller chunks, and these, as I say, not just show after show to show, but keeping it fresh with like a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or a Q&A and that sort of thing.
Well, and this may be sort of a redundant question. The next one then of this segment, and the second to last one, would you like to see it where it's just the main members if they did something at like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or a Grammys type of thing? Or would you like to see a situation where it's a one night or a 2 night thing where they have the main guys, but then guys who have played with them over the years come and help support them that are, still alive?
Oh, I think that latter that you just mentioned, having other former members or touring members who happen to be in the area or could be prevailed upon to come down for that night. I think that would be great because I think that, the principals have had, they've been on a lot of TV shows and they've been interviewed a lot and answered a lot of questions. But I think that the real diehard fans maybe have some questions for the Mike Kowalskis of the world, or the Bobby Figs of the world.
Yes, the Bobby Figs or the Charles Lloyds or the Carly Munoz.
Exactly, Carly Munoz. I would love to see that.
Or Ricky Furtar. I don't know if he played because I had seen James Taylor in Providence, Rhode Island a few years ago on the last date of his tour, and I know Ricky plays with Bonnie Raitt and her band, so that would be great to see him because he was a focal point or a big point in the
there's been a couple of times that Bonnie's been in the town that we're at, and Ricky has sat in with us on a couple of occasions with the Brian Wilson band, which is always fun. He's a great guy.
Well, wasn't he on the No Pressure album for maybe a song or something like that?
Maybe he was. I know that he was definitely part of the soundstage special we did, where some of the No Pressure stuff was done.
That might be what it was.
Yeah, like Hold On, Dear Brother, and that was one in particular I remembered he was on, probably on Sail on Sailor. Reliving that that time when they were, in the early 70s time when Ricky and Blondie were in the band at the same time, from The Flame.
Yeah. Now I know, we mentioned this earlier about the rock and roll stuff that Brian was possibly going. Obviously, more than me, so we don't need examples, and we don't need to go into it deeply because I don't want to get you in trouble or myself. But if you had the option, would you like to see new Brian solo material or a solo album, but it was covers of rock and roll stuff?
It depends how. It kind of depends. I wouldn't mind seeing covers of songs that were written by other people as long as Brian was engaged and had original ideas. And I think he's slowed down a bit in recent years, and the original ideas part of it is not as prevalent as it once was. I'm thinking, for example, of Sloop John B., which was brought by Al to the group in a very sort of, I won't say simplistic, but plain and unadorned Kingston Trio version. And then Brian did his magic and had all these original ideas and made it into the masterpiece that it is today. I think Brian does still have that capability of him in it, but I think that I would almost rather hear original songs of Brian's, because then he can't rely on sort of pat chord forms, 1, 4, 5, and he may go 1, 4, 5 like those old rock and roll songs often did, but it gives him the leeway to do more, for lack of a better word, original stuff. I think if he writes the songs and arranges them, then if whereas if he just arranged and produced them, then I think that there's more of a chance of us getting some of that stuff that we all love, the solar systems, like a song like that, which it could only, to me, be written by Brian. I listened to a song like Solar System or Johnny Carson, and the things on Love You are so Brian-esque. And I think that the real fans love that side of Brian.
Yeah. Well, as Blondie calls him the maestro, I'm sure the maestro's got some type of sleeve, and he's one of the most creative and amazing head scratcher type of persons where you don't know what's he gonna do next, but he's got something. But Probyn, I want to say, and to do this interview type of thing for this long, it means a lot, and to take time out of your day, as I've said before, I appreciate it, and it's been a blast.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be part of it, and I'm sure you'll edit out whatever gaffes or stupid things I said.
Now, what I usually do, and you can do it if you want. If you have nothing, that's perfect. I let my guest promote anything that they have or that they can say that they're working on, or anything else in the future.
Oh, thank you. I actually don't have anything. Although with the passing of Nick Walusko, it's sort of put a fire under my butt to get it together to maybe make a solo album at last, which I never have done. I've always been in sort of other people's bands. A couple of times I've tried to get bands going of my own, but it never really sailed. And plus some of the music that is in my head would take a rather large band to perform, and I don't have the money to pay them. So maybe it'll end up being me or anyway. So no, there's no particular project upcoming that I need to plug, but thank you for the offer.
Well, of course. Well, for all those out there that enjoyed this wonderful conversation with the wonderful and multi-talented and faceted musician, Probyn Gregory, do us a favor, subscribe, like, comment, share, follow, that grand stuff. So years from now, 10 years from now, whatever it may be, you look back and say, oh my gosh, the episode with Probyn Gregory was amazing. It means a lot. If you want news and updates regarding the podcast, check it out on Twitter, Nolan Carr Night, on Instagram, Nolan Carr at Night Show. And in the words of Johnny Carson, I bid you a heartfelt good night until we see each other again.